Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Rangers Journal. Tonight we're going to be looking forward at the brand new season that what the Rangers campaign hopefully will have in store for us. We've got a great panel tonight of the guys who are going to go through not only our thoughts on the season, but touching on obviously the game that we have coming up at Hearts tomorrow. So I'll just go through and introduce everyone. First of all, to my right. Is Dave. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, cheers for having me on, Doug.
No problem. And below me, I have in his luxurious away shirt, Tomo.
Evening, Doug. Thanks for having me. How are you doing? You okay?
No problem. I'm doing good. Thanks. Yourself?
Yeah, good. Eve of a new season, full of optimism. Let's go. Let's get it going.
Yep. And with a wry smile there to my diagonal, we have Gary. Welcome, Gary.
Hi there, Doug. I was just thinking, if you listen to a group chat, I read a group chat at different points, full of optimism, maybe a loose term. No, it's when you get to the day before a new season, it starts to get a little bit more real, doesn't it? A bit more exciting.
I think a lot of us have been looking forward to just having the football back and having things getting going again. I do enjoy the transfer period. It can be quite exciting, but this one has felt like it's dragged a little bit. But as I say, well, now that we've got the football back on our doorstep, we've got plenty to start to talk about. Okay, so first of all, as I said, we'll have a little talk about our hopes for the season. I think there's hopes and there's demands. I think it's fair to say two things. As with every Rangers season, the goal is to win every competition that we're in, with perhaps a slight asterisk beside the Champions League. But the goal is a treble. But what, Dave, would you say are your hopes going into this season, given where we are currently?
So I think you're right in what you're saying, Doug. The hope is always a treble domestically and being competitive in Europe. I think if we're being realistic, that probably isn't going to be on the cards this season. I think we've seen a bit of expectation set in the last couple of weeks from the manager, and I think it's probably quite telling actually that the board have just handed out a new contract to him today as well. I think that in of itself is a bit of a message to the fans that this in essence is a long-term project. I think it was also interesting from his presser, and he was talking about the kind of team staggering up, tapering up to that kind of proper performance level. So I think really my hope is that we can stay in it for now, get to the end of the transfer window, hopefully get a few more bodies in, then kind of see where we're at. I think for now, my immediate hope is, as I say, just to stay competitive at this stage.
Cool. And Guy, if I come to you on the assumption that we do manage to continue to be competitive, Paul's put in the chat there that he feels like we've got a better injury list than last season, which I don't think would have been hard, but we have obviously shifted out a few players like Roof, like Jack, who spent the majority of their time, off the field than on. What's your thoughts on that, specifically in terms of, do you think we're in a better place now in terms of having more availability? And then what are your thoughts in terms of your hopes for the season?
I've seen that message come from Paul, and I was thinking of my hopes was, one of them was less injuries. I think injuries derailed us the last two seasons as much as anything else. Now, I think whether the jury's out, we don't know. These 8-9 players we brought in, whether they're going to be part of the problem in terms of injuries that we've had in previous years. We'd like to think that they are going to be more robust, but we have not got a good track record so far. It's hard to know as to what's caused that. I think it doesn't help that some players still seem susceptible to injuries. There's certainly still, and you're going to get injuries. That's part and parcel of football. There's no worries around that. I think that's having enough depth and quality in the squad to cover that, which may be the bigger question as we start to go through this pod. I think in terms of my hopes, hope to see a better brand of football, I suppose, for being honest. I think towards the end of the season we were perhaps running empty and the ball being hoofed into one side of the pitch to the other was maybe not conducive to exciting football. I'd like to see a better brand of football, a recognised style. I'd like to see some more fluidity around the team, around how they play and around the style. And I suppose what you'd like to see is creativity. Wingers that beat people, strikers that get you on the edge of the seat. And for me, certainly over the last 2 or 3 years, we've lost a lot of heroes. As I say that as a middle-aged man, shouldn't have heroes as footballers, but we've lost a lot of heroes that like your Alfredo and Ken and other ones that have been really successful. I think, as Clement said today, it's the end of a cycle. And with that cycle, lots of people that done good things for us are away. So hopefully we can find unearth a few new heroes this year.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. I think, yeah, definitely injuries is something we want to try and keep our control. I think the phrase is unnecessary injuries is probably the thing we want to keep control on. Obviously, Clement touched on the fact that things weren't really maybe getting done behind the scenes the way they should have done. We had equipment not getting used and things like that. So I think getting on top of those type of things will help with the unnecessary injuries. Like you say, players will get injured in matches and that'll happen. So that's part of the game. Moving on to yourself, Tom. Alongside your hopes, Davey in the chat has talked about mastering the Old Firm games and being at least 50-50 on that to have a foundation to build from. Do you have any particular thoughts on that alongside your overall hopes?
Yeah, I mean, coming to the Old Firm thing, we weren't a million miles away last season, but it was the same story in near enough every game where Celtic, for the first 25, 35 minutes, would run all over us and have a couple of goals to show for it. And then second half, they'd either take the foot off the gas, tire, whatever it might be, and we'd sneak one back and put a little bit of fight in. We need to be going at them from the very beginning. But touching on the injuries, I think we underestimate how much that killed us last season. For the best part of 6 months, Dessers was pretty much our only recognised centre forward. Danilo was out. Kemar Roof was, just here or there. I mean, never the player he once was. And then we lost Seymour. His replacement came in. We lost him after 4 or 5 games for the rest of the season. I suppose this season, I want to see us just have a good core of players who are going to play 30, 40 games a season. And it's not going to be chopping and changing and filling gaps here and there with the likes of Sterling having to go left wing or right wing and just to get a team on the pitch. So I want us to be competitive, and I think we will be competitive. And I want to see the new guys that we've signed, and I'll add the likes of Cortez to that because I'm putting him down as basically a new signing. Hit the ground running. None of this, we need 6 months to settle in. Hit the ground running and getting goals from other areas of the pitch. A big onus was on, obviously, Dessers last season. He wasn't really helped out by the wingers, outside forwards, whatever you want to call them. The midfield didn't really add goals. So I'd like to see goals being spread out throughout the team. But I am optimistic. I think Gary said it was the end of a cycle for a few players. Connor Goldson leaving, while I think he's been a great servant, it was time for him to go. The lad he's been replaced with, Proper, from what I've seen and read about him, I think he'll be suited to the Scottish game. And just that new blood having that little bit more hunger to kick on and get success with us. So I'm looking forward to it and get to the end of the transfer window. Hopefully, get a couple of more players in. Midfielder, we look really light in that position, and hopefully, Igaman gets up to speed and we start seeing him soon as well.
Yeah, definitely. I say he's one I think a lot of fans have been talking about. He's not been in any of he's not really been in any training videos or games or anything. So I think getting to see him, Igaman, would be would be something exciting and fresh for us, and good to see. I'll just very quickly, we're going to move into talking about more specifically where we are. I think we kind of touched on that a little bit. Just a quick question from Paul here, asking about a player we were linked with Brighton, a midfielder. Could that possibly have been Stephen? Was it Alzate? I think his name was. I'm sure we were linked with him not long after Clermont came in. He was a midfielder. He said at the time, if memory serves, that he wanted to stay in the Premier League. So I don't know whether that's a signing we could go back to, but it is an area that I think midfield that we do potentially need to add players. I was looking at I put into our chat today, not long before we started our Champions League registration, and it's a little bit light potentially in the midfield area, although we do have a lot of the young players that aren't on the list because they come into list B that can fill in. We're maybe a bit light in terms of starting players. If there's any areas, Dave, that you would still like to see Rangers bringing in players, what would they be? Where do you think we're still lacking at this point?
Yes, I think there's a couple of worries with the squad for me, to be honest with you, Doug. So I think firstly, one of my biggest concerns is I'm not sure we're a million miles away in the starting squad. I think we could absolutely do a couple of more. But by God, once you get away from that starting lineup, the lack of depth is massive, massive issue. And if we do end up in a situation where we get a few injuries in key areas, then you're basically back to what we had at the end of last season. You've got the likes of Wright and Matondo on the wings. Take that number 10 position as well. I know there's a debate whether we should actually be playing with 10 or whether we should move to a flat midfield. I don't think Clermont seems up for changing that. He seems quite set on the idea of playing with 10. And if we're going to do that, at the minute we have Lawrence. That's pretty much it. I've seen in the chats sort of talk about some of the youngsters, and I think the obvious, when you're talking the 10 position youngster is Alex Lowry. He had his chance, and from what I heard from the manager afterwards, I think he blew that chance. I don't think he lived up to expectations at all, and he's been confirmed now he's back with the B team. So I think 10 is obviously a big one for me if Clermont is going to persist with playing a 10. And personally, I still think we need a striker as well. People keep talking about Dessers, and when things are going well for Dessers, class act. I think the problem for me is we know over a season that he will not do that consistently, and that's my worry. Yeah, we've got Danilo. He's coming back from injury, so you're certainly not going to be expecting wonders from him anytime soon. And actually, he did okay when he did get that wee run of games, but I wouldn't exactly say he set the heather alight. There was some frustrations there. And that could just be that he needs a run of games. But at the moment, I don't think as fans we really know the answer to that yet. Is he that answer? Or is it that kind of old absence syndrome where he's not been about, so we've, as fans, decided he's the answer because he's not there? You just don't know. So I think, position-wise, 10 and a striker. I think there's quite obviously a few other ones as well. I'd argue we need another centre-back. Wing is scary, scary once you get away from those starters, as I said. And I think overall, David's just put in the chat there, we need 2 players for every position. He's bang on. At the minute, we're miles away from that. So, yeah, okay, you just look at that starting lineup in isolation, probably not too terrible, but when you move beyond that initial glance, I think there's still a heck of a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. If I come to you there, Gary, Dave's touched on sort of some of the younger players there, and we've got a comment I'll bring back up here from our friends at Not Another Rangers podcast. When you're subscribing to us, make sure to go over and subscribe to them as well. They put a couple of the players there, Rice, McKinnon, Fraser, Loveless, and obviously you can add Lowry, I think, into that. Group 2. If you had to pick one young player that you think you would bank to be able to come in if we were to say have a key injury somewhere, which one is the one for you that's the most likely to sort of do a McCausland, come in and actually maintain a position? And what areas would you like to strengthen?
The challenge is we don't really know, do we? We don't see enough of the young players to know how good they are. You hear a lot about Bailey Rice being a potential superstar in the making, but I've seen him play half a friendly in a few minutes here and there, so I'm basing it on perception rather than reality. Similarly with people at Lovelace, again, he played a half against St Mirren, I think, if I remember rightly. And McKinnon, with all due respect, you probably don't, at that 21, 22, you're probably struggling to see him becoming a first-team regular. So I think, funnily enough, ability-wise, it's probably Lowry. I think, as Dave says, maybe the argument is his attitude and effort and all the other stuff that goes with it that Clement maybe didn't seem to allude to as being a negative. If you're looking at a player that probably isn't the most natural ability, he's the one that jumps out to me. But I think that we've got to remember as well that Cortez, Hefty, Yilmaz, there's a whole pile of young players that are young players. They're not academy players, but young players. And we've got to be careful that you're not playing too many at the one time. And that could also be detrimental. I think in terms of strengthening, very simply, when you're a central midfielder, we don't have enough. You have Barron, you have Diamande, you have Raskin. Arguably Sterling can play there, arguably Doyle could play there, but it's not the position. So you've literally got 3 midfielders. I think somebody said in the chat, two players for a position. We've currently got 3 for 2 positions for 2 positions. So there's one missing straight away. Similarly, if we've got Lawrence or Doyle for number 10, potentially Scott Wright, because he can play anywhere apparently over pre-season. You've maybe got somebody there, but again, a number 10 is potentially needed. So I think, to me, you're going to get rid of you hopefully get a buyer for Campbell and Hadji and replace him at number 10, a central midfielder, and that's probably then becomes a case of one in, one out, depending on bids we receive for some of those other players.
Absolutely, I think that will be a key part of the puzzle alongside how we get on with our Champions League qualifiers. The finances, I think, will dictate to a degree what ins and outs we do get in the final weeks. So if I come to you, Tomo, obviously we've hit on a couple of points there, 2 players in every position. Both guys agreeing we're light in the midfield. In terms of we've touched on obviously youth players, whether or not they'll play, and the fact that we have young players who are the same as youth players. Do you still want to see, in terms of the signings that are still to come in, more experience like we've done with the most recent one, Proper, or would you be happy if it's another couple of lads that are kind of early 20s?
Yeah, I mean, it depends who the experienced player is, and it's the same with the youngsters. They need to be good enough. We can't just be chucking them in because they're youngsters, I'm sure if Bailey Rice was ready to play games, he'd be in the team. You've got to remember the manager, the coaching staff, we see these players every day. So if they were ready to be playing regularly, they'd be in there. So there's got to be reasons why they're not in or around the squad. Dave touched on it with Alex Lowry, and I've said it in the past. I don't think he's going to make it with us. He'll be another one, I think, who had a lot of hype as a youngster, and he'll be out of the door and playing somewhere else, and good luck to the lad. But anytime he's been given a chance, he's not really taken it. I would like to see a midfielder in there who's going to control the midfield, an experienced guy who, I say, who's going to control things. Don't know who that person is, but again, that's up to the management to pinpoint the right person and get them in. But again, I've got no issues with the kids coming in, but we need to be good enough. And we've touched on this in the past, where they don't play regularly, the B team. So how can we expect them to be ready for first team games if they're not playing week in, week out at some sort of level? That's something that needs to get sorted as well. So hopefully this coming season, the B team will have more games so these guys can get more experience. But going back in the past, whenever Lovelace had a couple of games for us, I really liked the look of him. Unfortunately, got injured against St Mirren when he was playing well, and then that was it. He came back, got injured again, and that was it for him for his season. But he looked like a talent, and we just,
I wish.
I'd say, peak 2 guy would sort of it would. If we go back in time, get a peak Barry Ferguson as well while we're at it, you know. But that sort of player we need, and Gary touched on it with the number 10 playing Tom Lawrence. I've said it before. I think his legs have gone. I don't think he's someone we can rely on. I expect him to start tomorrow because he scored a couple of goals last week against Union Berlin. And we don't seem to have anyone else. But if we're going to assist with that number 10 role, we're going to have to get someone else in because I don't see Lawrence being able to do it for the full season. Dowell being able to do it. Maybe Danilo can play in there. But again, that leaves you a striker short. So there is a lot for the management and the recruitment team to still be looking at. But it would be nice to finally get some young players through the academy who are good enough and who can get in the squad on a regular basis.
I'm sorry, Justin Two Guy, the only issue with that, you'd have the stadium by now for smoking, wouldn't it? You wouldn't be able to play on the pitch.
How times have changed in more ways than one. I think Paul's like you said, as well. Paul's put up a good comment there about Rice. He's still very young. A lot of people, I think, obviously compare him to Lennon Miller. It's a similar, if not the same age, I believe. I'm thinking, if he can do that at Motherwell, why can't we do the same with Rice? But I think one thing some people sometimes forget is that they're very different situations coming into play for Rangers. While at maybe the tail end of a title assault is a very different thing to playing for Motherwell. Maybe sitting in the middle of the table somewhere and having to do your exams at the same time. So I think we need to sometimes remember that with some of the players as well. Some of them are younger than we maybe sometimes think about. And although Miller's obviously been able to come in and has flourished, and I would love to think that Rice would come into Rangers and do the same, but I know how Rangers fans can be, so I'm not entirely sure if the pressure on the two young lads' shoulders would be equal.
Can I just comment on that point, Doug?
Well, how will we look at our opponents for the? Yeah.
Sorry, Doug. Just on that point, just playing devil's advocate on there, and I'm not putting Bailey Rice on any of these people's level or anything like that. But in Scotland, we seem to class youngsters up to they're about 23, 24 years of age, whereas in other leagues, you've got players who have played a couple of hundred games by that time. You've had Lamal winning the European Championships with Spain when he's 16. Exactly. And again, I'm not saying his ability is the same as him, but the likes of Bellingham, Dortmund picked him up when he was 16, 17. He's just turned 21, and look at how many games he's played. So I just think we need to get away from this calling them youngsters when they're 21, 22, 23 years of age. If they're good enough, get them in there and get them that experience. The reason Lennon Miller is getting games from Motherwell, it's not because they're a charity or because they're a mid-table team. It's because he's good enough to play in their team at that age. And I would like to think that if the players are good enough, the manager will be giving them minutes. So the only thing you can think of at the moment is they're not quite ready, and it then goes back to the question: why are they not ready? When will they be ready? But again, that's a question for another day, probably another podcast somewhere. But sorry for jumping in there.
Hold on that, couldn't you?
Yeah. So I say sorry for jumping in there, Doug. I just wanted to add my point there.
Yeah, no, that's fine. As I say, we want to have different points coming through. And it's a good point. And I do agree when they're getting into the 20s, you certainly want to hopefully see them getting to get their chance. Okay, doke. So let's see. The other thing we're going to have a look at tonight is obviously our opponents in the upcoming game, which is Hearts. So we want to have a little look at the team that they potentially are going to field for us tomorrow. So I've made a couple of starter notes just to get us going, and I'll come to the guys to get their thoughts about some of these points and any points that they have themselves. Hearts have had a busy season in terms of, or season, I should say, in terms of signings. So they've signed quite a few players. I believe it's around 7 or 8 players that they've got had coming in, and a not too dissimilar number going out as well. One of their main danger men that went out was Cochrane. He linked up very well with Shankland last season. They had quite a good goal assist ratio between the two of them. So that's one positive. But they have brought in a couple of decent players. Jan Danda from Ross County, who I thought was quite impressive last season. He's come in. I think he'll be a good player from them. And they brought in Spittle from Motherwell. He's a decent player, quite adaptable on the sort of centre and left, I believe, of midfield. They similarly have had a bit of a disappointing pre-season, so both teams probably coming into this game looking to make a good impression on their fans. They were kind of did a couple of different things kind of formationally. So they had a bit of a 4-3-3 at one point, a 4-2-3-1, and then a kind of a 3-4-1-1 or 3-5-1, which is kind of similar to what they played in most of the games against us last season. In terms of just very general points, centre backs a little bit slow on the ground. I think if we've got pace up front, we can make some inroads there. They've brought in Penrice, who's got very good delivery. That's something that we'll need to look out for. Obviously, defending cross balls is not something we've not been the best at, but we've also got a couple of new defensive options in to look at that. They've also got Shankland, who is their obvious and clear danger man, but Vargas up front is also quite pacey. They'll probably look to get balls through and into him, particularly from players like Danda in the midfield. And they are quite decent on dead balls in general, so that's something to look out for. So those were my kind of scratch points on Hearts in terms of the dangers from them and kind of weaknesses. Dave, you got any particular things on Hearts that you would worry about, or in terms of their strengths, or things that you've noticed in previous games?
Yeah, so I think Shankland's obviously the key danger man, if you will. He's the one that most of our fans will recognise because we've been linked with signing him for the last 6 months. Outside of that, you make a good point about Vargas. Anytime I've seen them kind of playing, he's always been in about the play. And I think Danda will actually do really well there. I thought he looked relatively dangerous as a player in what was, for all intents and purposes, quite a poor Ross County side. So you then take him and add quality around him, and okay, quality's relative, but you know, compared to what he had at Ross County, it's quite clearly a step up going to Hearts. So the players he'll be playing with. I think the other thing that I'd call out with Hearts is they've got incredibly strong goalkeeping options. So Gordon might be pushing on a bit, still decent keeper, and I think Clark did very well for them last season. So yeah, they'd be my key things. I think is the keepers, and up top, I think they pose a danger.
Yeah, I think they've spread their minutes across the keepers in their pre-season games, from what I understand. So it'll be interesting to see who they go with. Obviously, they've got Craig Gordon there, who everyone's very familiar with. But I think they might go with I can't remember the last name, but the other one who I doubt
Clark.
Clark, that's it. Yeah. I would have thought they'd potentially go with him. Obviously, Gordon is much older and not quite the goalkeeper that he once was. And I think risking upsetting Clark could be dangerous for them in the longer term, but I suppose we shall see. Gary, what about yourself? Is there any particular things that you are worried about with Hearts? Do you think there's anything to worry about, or obviously we had a reasonably good season all in against them last year. Do you think that will continue going into the new season?
I think they're a decent side, Hearts. I think, as you said, they made a number of changes. It's hard to know how they will bed in. At Tynecastle's never an easy place to go to, so it's always a challenge. They're usually up and at them for the first 20 minutes, certainly, and then it's really about calming that kind of crowd that are on top of you. So I think the worst thing we can do, particularly when we're not in the best moment, as opposed when we're starting to start a rebuild, is to lose an early goal. I think that's the challenge. If you can bed yourself into the game, I think we've got more quality than them. We've got better players than them. We should be able to create more. We've got a striker that can score as many goals as Shankland, some would say. Some would say other things as well. But so I think the challenge is you don't know how Hearts are going to fully play. As you say, the pre-season has been pretty abysmal, same as ours. But pre-season means nothing at the end of the day. That's what we've been saying for the last few weeks, as ours has not been particularly good. So on the day, I think it's going to be a close game. You're looking at something that's going to be tight. It's going to be small margins probably. You might need your bigger players than your more experienced players to step up to get that moment. But you'd still think we should have enough in the tank to scrape at least a narrow victory.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just take a wee second here just to apologise, folk, if you're noticing a delay whenever I'm speaking to Tomo. I've no idea what the problem is, but for some reason I'm just getting a bit of lag with him. So please bear with me if it takes me a couple of extra seconds to start talking when he finishes. I do want to make sure we're getting Tomo's points because he's a clever guy and an exciting podder to have. So I don't want us to be missing out. And I'll hopefully you want to keep listening to me as well. So we'll carry on for now. Hopefully it's not too much of a problem. So coming to you, Tomo, your thoughts on Hearts?
Yeah, I'm going to go against the grain here, but I've got no worries. I've got to be honest. I think we'll win comfortably. We've had the sort of the hoodoo over them for a fair while now. Tynecastle can be an intimidating atmosphere, but I can't remember sort of the last time we lost there. I can't remember the stats, but last time I looked, we've got a really good record against Hearts. Shankland hasn't really done a huge amount against us. I agree with what a couple of people have said about Danda. I thought he looked a really exciting player at Ross County, so I think he will make a bit of a difference to that Hearts attack. But yeah, I've got no worries there tomorrow. I think that we'll be fine, and I think we'll have a straightforward victory. As I say, it might just be my over optimism. I don't know, but I'm happy with the team we've got at the minute, and we'll go there and we'll get the job done and start the season off on the front foot.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that's the case. I do think we've got a decent team. I think I'm reasonably confident going into the game myself. I do think Hearts have the potential to cause a little bit of problems. Obviously, Shankland has scored a couple of goals, but I think I'm with you, Tom. I'm fairly confident that we've got our team is better than we think it maybe is, but time will tell. And that is, I am also, I suppose, in my head, I'm thinking about some of the new players that I know aren't necessarily going to be starting, so we'll have to see. Okay, so coming back around to yourself, Dave, in terms of strengths, we've sort of talked about the things that we think that they might bring in. In terms of us getting at Hearts, what do you think are going to be the main things that we can exploit with them, or in terms of our strengths, do you think there's particular strengths that we should be looking to take to the game tomorrow?
Yeah, I think again, to be honest, Doug, you nailed it when you first introduced these kind of two questions. It's pace in attack and incisiveness for me. I fully expect us to have a lot of the ball. I think, Toma does raise a valid point. We've got a very good record against them. So I think mentally, we're okay. But it's that incision, and I think we've seen that quite a lot towards the end of last season as those injuries started to bite, that we were struggling to cut teams open. So I think they're there to be got at, but we need to take advantage of that, if I'm being honest. And that's probably the unknown. I thought there was a really interesting comment from Paul, and he said, we have the players to beat them. It's only us that beat ourselves. I think that applies two ways. I think it applies defensively, as we saw in the Union game, where we were managing to attack them, but we were getting cut open. But I think it also applies to our attack, and can we take that form when we're attacking that we had against Union, or will it be more like the end of last season? So weaknesses are there. I think the centre backs, we have a good record against them. I think they're not the quickest, as you mentioned, but we have to take advantage of that.
Yep, absolutely. Not something we've always done in previous years. That's been one of my big gripes that I hope some of our new signings will address, taking chances that we create. If I come to you, Gary, Paul has said in the chat here, pressing as a team, Cortez and Diomande to unlock the spaces. Touching on Diomande specifically and sort of alongside him, Barron, the two of them looked very bright in the pre-season games, and I would suggest that maybe the two of them were the main highlight, of course, across the sort of multiple games that we played. How do you see them coming into the game and sort of going into the season a little bit, developing as a duo? And do you think that they could be a key part of the team for this season?
I think Diomande was excellent. He's got real ability. You can see the potential he's got to move up levels, and we'll be lucky to keep him probably a year from now if he continues to progress. He's got the touch. He's the way he can move his body as the ball comes across him, and take those risks with the ball. So I think he's a fantastic player. I think he's real driving force in the midfield, and we're looking at creative players for tomorrow. And the ones that you think are going to do something, I think he's certainly one of the ones. If I'm being honest, and this is probably going to sound quite critical, I think Barron's maybe been over praised, and I think he's been good. I think he's been fine. I think there's maybe a little bit of a willingness across the support for a young Scottish player to grab the mantle and take over from Ferguson and Jack and all these other ones. I'm not quite sure his performances have merited it. I think he's been good. I don't think he's been poor in any way, but I don't think he's maybe been quite as good as the suggestion would be in the conversation. So, and I think probably going forward, I suppose my question would be to the group, if we get to the end of August and he's the first choice of a two-man midfield, him and Diomande would be satisfied with that. And I think probably, for all being honest, we might say no, we'd rather a more experienced, more dominant midfielder there at this point. So I think he'll be a great squad player. I think he'll grow into the role, and I think he'll develop as time goes by. But at the moment, he is a good player. There's potential to be a really good player.
Okay, Tom, I'll put Gary's question to you. Do you think, are you happy with those two at the sort of the base of the midfield, assuming that we're going to stick with the sort of the 4-2-3-1? And if not, is it Barron the one that you think would rotate out for someone new?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a difficult one. The only time I really saw Barron at Aberdeen was when he was playing against us, and I thought in the games he done fine, and he played well enough. During pre-season, he gets about the pitch. Looking at his stats from Aberdeen, he's not someone who's going to be much of an asset going forward. So I don't think we're going to expect a lot of goals, a lot of assists from him. But hopefully he comes in and, as Gary has said, grows into the role. When we signed Ryan Jack, he was a little bit older, a bit more experienced. But he had a few struggles when he first came in. And then once Gerrard sort of got hold of him, in my opinion, he was the best midfielder that we had in the squad during the time. And it was just injuries that unfortunately done it for him. But if Barron can have a similar sort of trajectory, I'd be more than happy with that going forward. We've obviously got Raskin to come back as well. I've never been a huge fan of his, but it's a new slate for everyone, so let's see what he can bring as well. You could even see him and Barron with Diamande playing a little bit further forward as a midfield three. So it does give a few more options really. But from what I've seen of Barron, I've got no issues with him playing there, getting games and getting more experience, and hopefully turning into a better player.
Absolutely, yep. And I think we've got Scott here in the chats saying need experience in the sixth role above anything else. And I think that it's an interesting option. I've heard some people touch on is the idea of bringing in a more experienced sort of defensive midfielder and potentially pushing Diamande into that more attacking role that maybe perhaps sort of Lawrence is sitting in or has been sitting in recently, and have Diamande as that more advanced player as a potential option. So I think that that has potential legs as well, depending on the player that comes in. And I think that leads us nicely into the sort of the next section, which is having a look at the guys' predicted lineups for tomorrow. So just to caveat this, first of all, these lineups were put together this morning before the presser. But that will give us a couple of things to talk about. There are some names in our starting lineups that we were hoping to see that have since been ruled out. So we'll sort of talk about that a little bit as well. So I've got Dave's lineup first here. So we've got Dave lining up with the kind of the four. I forget, was yours a 4-3-3 or the 4-2?
No, mine was 4-2-3-1, mate.
4-2-3-1.
As I said, I just don't see Clement changing from this anytime soon. And just to caveat this was after one change. Scott Wright would never willingly appear in my starting lineup. But it was, so I'd seen the Cherney interview by that point and seen that he'd ruled himself out as starting basically. So given a relative lack of options elsewhere, I think it's probably pretty safe to say Wright will start that one, whether I like it or not.
What about your right back? Who are you going to put in for Sterling, who's apparently injured?
I think it'll be Tav. I don't think he'll be fully fit, but I don't think Divine has seen enough minutes in pre-season to suggest that he really features in Clement's plans at all. So I suspect we'll see a half-fit Tav starting there. Or not half-fit, but, not fully up to speed.
Yeah. Would you potentially risk, obviously you've got Balogun in your centre-backs at the moment, would you potentially risk pulling him out right and bringing in Davies, or potentially playing King in that right back, who's done that a couple of times?
So, again, this was kind of pre a change. From what I gather from Clement's press conference, I think Proper's kind of 50-50 at the minute. I don't think the paperwork had gone through at the time of the presser. I don't know if that's obviously changed this afternoon. So we've probably got a bit of a wait and see here. The main reason I took Balogun alongside Proper is as good as Proper's meant to be, I think probably one of his main weaknesses is his pace. And again, probably leads to a bit of a wider discussion, but I think that's a bit of a common theme through most of our centre backs, if I'm being honest. So that's kind of why I'd plump for Balogun. I think he might be a wee bit slower than maybe what he was a couple of years ago, but I think he's still by far and away got the best recovery pace out of anyone else.
Absolutely. I think got a couple of good options there. Bit of chat, a bit of chat in the chat, a bit of discussion in the chat about Proper and whether people would start him or just give him a second half. Sort of looking at your more attacking phases there. I mean, I kind of feel like a lot of that does pick itself in terms of Barron, Diamande, Lawrence, Cortez. Right, as much as many people are probably at the point of tears starting off a season with Wright in the first 11. To his credit, he was one of the better players in pre-season. So as I say,
that's not a high bar for mate.
If we do have, if we are waiting on the fitness of others, I think that's fine to, start him, and then hopefully we see him coming off returning at some point during the game. What are your hopes for Dessers this season? Do you think we'll get, basically the same again, lots of goals but key misses, or do you think he can make improvements having been in the league for a year now?
I don't think he will significantly change. I think he's at a stage of his career where if that was going to be developed out of him, it would have happened by now. So I think with Dessers, kind of what you see is what you get. I think the biggest deciding factor when it comes to Dessers and how this season at Rangers pans out for him is actually going to be what Danilo does. If he can come in, take his chances when he gets them, and I don't think he'll start tomorrow. I don't think he's quite ready from what the manager said a few times along the way. But when he does get his chance, if he can come in and seize that, I think the number 1 spot's ripe, the number 9 spot, should I say, but number 1 striker is ripe for the taking. But it's whether Danilo has the ability to do that. And that, I think, will determine how much of Dessers we see. As I said, when he starts, I think what you see is what you get. He is going to frustrate. He is going to bug the hell out of us as fans, but he will still get a decent amount of goals. And I think, we slate him. I'll put my hands up on the first. He frustrates the life out of me, that guy. But there's no arguing with the fact that he did get decent numbers last season, despite all those misses. Yeah, you can debate, right? You should have had double that, and I've said it a few times, but the fact is, he's still got decent numbers, and I can't think how many years it is since we've had a striker that's cleared 20 goals in a season. I think Morelos did it once. Did he?
Yeah, he did it once, yeah.
But outside of that, it's been absolute years, mate. And yet we're sitting here knocking the guy, which in some ways is a bit strange, but, at the same time, I do get it because he is a frustrating player.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so thanks for your lineup there. So I'll move over to Gary and have a look at yours. Let's just click this over here if it wants to do it. Close this. Right, so Gary, we've got a very similar sort of starting group from yourself. Obviously, we've got the same thing issue with Sterling. Charney says he's not ready.
That's not mine there on the screen.
Is it not?
No, can't be. Not even a want to be a team for me.
Okay, what was take me through yours? I'll make it.
Yeah, so Butland, Tav. I think Tav starts and then would have started irrespective of whether Sterling was fit or not. I think. I was interested in watching his interview yesterday, which seemed to suggest he's been carrying injury for a while. He was letting rest as opposed to anything else. So you wonder how long that's been ongoing for. So I think he'll start. I think he remains one of our most influential players, irrespective of people's views on his long-term future. I would have started Proper, mainly because, or Prepare, or however you say his name, mainly because we have a Champions League game starting on Tuesday and you don't want to get him playing as many minutes as you possibly could. However, it does seem unlikely that he's going to start. I would probably have played on the Proper on the left-hand side, Suter on the right. I think with what I've read on him, Proper is proper two-footed, and he's more potential for that side of roles. And Suter obviously is a strong right-sided defender. I think his mistakes last season came predominantly getting caught down the left touchline, if I remember rightly. So Suter and Proper, Yilmaz is obviously in the left back. I think the only other one that I changed was, again, I was aware Czerny wasn't playing before we published this, so I would have went with right. I think the interesting thing, there's maybe a couple of interesting points on this, is that McCausland played so many games last season. I don't think I ever hear many, if any, people talking about him being a fixture this season, which either suggests that we didn't think he cut the mustard as much as he should have last season, or we want to get better. So even looking at the team today, we've put lots picked Wright or Cherny before McCausland on that side. So you wonder what that means for our views on his future. And then just to pick up Dessers, I think Dessers will start. I think Dessers will remain our main striker at the moment. I think, as just Dave says, Danilo's way out of touch. Needs that time. Dessers' biggest problem in some ways is his movement is so good to get chances that he misses so many of them. Do you know, I think maybe sometimes the issue is that I was talking to my daughter about this. If you look at Morelos scored a similar amount of goals most seasons. I don't ever remember us talking about him missing lots of chances. No, that was because he wasn't getting as many chances and scoring, and his movement wasn't as good because he was played outside the box a lot of the time, whereas Dessers in the box and getting chance after chance and missed them. So I think sometimes his bigger issue is the fact that he's good at creating chances, which is a good trait to have, and maybe that's not a bad thing that he then still managed to pick 1 out of 3, the same way Alan McCoist and other people did, and being criticised for being in the right positions, maybe something that goes against him.
I see what I've done here. I saw your original message. I didn't see you corrected it later on in the chat, so I do apologise for that. I'm doing you dirty there. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of good points there. I do think Proper, like you say, he's two-sided, which is going to be really beneficial to give us a bit of flexibility with our centre backs, depending on who we want to bring in, and indeed the strengths of other teams as well. I think you could do different things with that, which is beneficial. I think that's a really interesting point about McCausland. I hadn't really thought about that before, but you're absolutely right. I don't see loads of people going in straight away with him. I do think we'll see him a fair amount this season. I'd like to think he is the overall in the pecking order above Wright, despite, as I said, Wright probably being maybe just the edge ahead at the moment, having had a decent pre-season. But I'd like to think McCausland is ahead of him overall. He certainly did more in his however many appearances than Wright has done in his 6, 7, 8 times appearances. So we'll see how that pans out. But obviously there's more competition in those areas now. Okay, doke. So I'll come over. Well, in fact, before I go, I'll touch on this point with you, Gary. The left-sided defence, we've got obviously Yilmaz, and we've got obviously Jeffrey, who I think it's fair to say had a mixed, if putting it kindly, pre-season. How do you think we're going to see the battle between those two for that position? Is it going to be, Yilmaz is number one and that's it, and you have to try to get in, or do you think we'll see more of an even potential between them?
I personally don't think there is a battle, to be honest with you. I think Red Vans came in as a £5 million Turkish international who has already at a level, whereas Jeffrey has come in at a £500,000 signing from being on loan in Cyprus. I think he's there as backup. I don't know why there's a perception that he was going to potentially battle out for the jersey at this moment in time. He may in the future, but at the moment I think he's very much a backup. He's very much some way behind in terms of experience and ability to play that. Well, skill and ability is one thing. Awareness and movement and all that stuff and knowing where to be is a different thing. I don't think he's anywhere near that at this point in time. So I think the biggest issue for me is Yilmaz's fitness. So that's the worry, is that consistently he's only played half a dozen games before breaking down. And Jeffrey will probably come in at that point in time. I think that's where his role is now. Yilmaz still needs to improve dramatically, as far as I'm concerned. He still needs to improve his final ball. He is defensively sometimes at fault as well, in the same way that Tav is, but probably doesn't get criticised to the same extent. That ball over the side, over the head. So I think he needs a lot of work as well. He's still some way off being the finished article, but he will start as first choice. And I think the issue may be watching the Union Berlin game. Cortez was caught sleeping a few times, wasn't he? And tracking back. Yep. And he has only 20 again, same as Jeff does. But I think you're really going to rely on Cortez doing that defensive shift that he's probably needing to learn and develop himself.
See a question for you then, Gary. Where does Robbie Fraser fit into that?
Robbie Fraser maybe fits in where Yilmaz gets that injury, then Jeffrey's first choice, and Robbie Fraser's waiting for him. I think it's quite an interesting one. I think he fits that profile as being on the Champions League bench. I think he fits a profile that Yilmaz hasn't been reliable, and maybe there is a thought that he won't they're reliable again, having that effectively Fraser's the second choice to the second choice.
Second choice to the second choice.
Yeah, I think I think the point that you touched on there in regards to Yilmaz's fitness is the main reason people are putting them on a bit more of an even keel. A lot of folks seem to have, or certainly midway through last season anyway, seem to have kind of written Yilmaz off, having been here for a wee while and not sort of grabs the position, as it were. And I think that's led to people sort of, as you say, maybe disregarding a little bit the fact where he actually is in terms of things compared to Jeffy, and maybe just a little bit of not knowing much about Jetty, obviously being a young guy coming in from an area that's not particularly well covered or watched. So I think interesting comparisons there. I think you made an excellent point about the Cortez covering. I think that's something that is mirrored on the right, where some of the grief that Tavernier gets in terms of blame is actually fault of the winger who happens to be ahead of him, not doing their job in terms of tracking back and covering. People obviously talk about Tavernier losing goals. I mean, that has been an issue from the day Tavernier arrived at the door, because we play him as a high advanced forward. I was, when it looked like he was all out the door, I was watching some older games and sort of a preparation for the Goodbye Tav pod. And it was, I can't remember now if it was either the Dumbarton game where he scored the winner to win us the league, or it was the cup game where he got the, I think it was the Dumbarton game, but he literally was standing practically on the penalty spot when when the ball is crossed in, and this was our right back who was like bang in this spot. And if you're going to play with a player like that, the team has to cover for that, and I think that's something that we've not done as well since sort of 22-23, and that has caused us, some of those problems down the right side. Jack and I was going to say sort of there, Jack and Goldson were very, very good at covering that space when Jack was kind of playing regularly. And since they two have kind of, or Goldson's form is dipped and Jack's just not been available, when we've had players like McCausland coming in a bit raw, we've seen a lot more, I think, of teams looking at that right side and going, right, we've got a right back who spends half his time up the pitch. We've got a brand new young winger. That's the area to aim for, and that makes perfect sense. I think it was one of the who was it now? Was it
the European game?
European game. McCausland is the one that's primarily. I'm not looking to like pile grief on McCausland, as he was very early on. He was primarily at fault for both of those goals because he wasn't tracking his runner, and so Tavernier had to make a decision. He had two players to aim to go with, and he had to pick with one, and it just made it easy enough for them to just dent the ball around and score. And a lot of people were blaming Tavernier for that, when ultimately, he was left with two men. There wasn't a lot he could do, which isn't, and that's not before, because I know I can be a bit Tavernier biased. So before anyone says, I'm not absolving Tavernier of all fault. He has his faults, and he has had his egregious errors. So I'm not saying that none of those things, but it is a factor in that, and that's something I think we will hopefully see improved this season as we go forward.
So just before you move on, Doug, just quickly,
Yep.
I suppose that is the interesting thing when we talk about shape and tactics, isn't it? I think that has been a part of the problem last season, is we were exposed down the sides, and because we didn't have that kind of midfield three and so forth. So that one of the things may look at is, you talked about your right back being up the park. Maybe you need to tailor that. You can't be right back up the park and in the box if you're going to play that style. And that's, so it'll be interesting to see tactically how it evolves over the course of the year.
So one of the things I picked up from Clement's press conference was he specifically called out the squad adherent structure, and how he wanted it more structural than just, I guess, flair players doing kind of whatever they want to get the win. It was all about the structure, and I think that is key. You need that structure, like you say. If your right back's pegging it up the pitch, you need someone to slide into that space, or we will ship goals. So, yeah, hopefully that is addressed as the season goes on through the structure and the way the team's set up. Absolutely, and not only is it important, I think, in general, but whether
come the closing of the window, Tavernier is here or not. One thing I've also been clear on during praising Tavernier is that this has to be the season that we start to transition to the post-Tavernier world, as it were. And that will involve a change, a fundamental change to how our right side operates, because we're never going to have, or unlikely to ever have, certainly in any near future, a player that plays like that from that position. So it will be a fundamental change, and probably will make that side a little more strong defensively, but obviously we'll miss out on the attacking benefits. Okie doke, so I'll shift over to Tomo and his team. I'm hoping that I've got this right. I don't know if you made any changes to yours, but we can update it as we go. I want to just, as a wee starter for 10 with your team, I think it was Smoke in the comments, Tomo, suggested playing Cantwell because it'll throw Hearts off. Cantwell, obviously, we know is playing in the B team. Do you see any way that he features at all before the close of the window? And if so, would you be interested in that, or do you think that's totally done now and he's away?
The only way I could see him playing is if he says, or if he goes and apologises, or however you want to put it, to Clement and says, I want to be part of this squad, I want to be part of this team. Until he does that, I'll be honest, I'm not interested. I was happy at the end of last season if he was to get sold. I've not been a massive fan of him. I don't see any way that he gets back into this squad now. I think he's burnt those bridges, and it'll just be if someone comes and takes him off our hands now. I don't see any way back. But I've said that about the likes of Morelos in the past, and he came back into the team and played regularly. But when you turn around and say, I don't want to play for the club anymore, it sort of ties the manager's hands in. There's not much he can do. Just on my team, Doug, I had Tavernier in for Sterling. That was the only thing that, But yeah, I can't see Cantwell playing again for us.
Well, I think I would probably agree with that as well. Smoke suggesting that he needs game time to get his money. To be honest, Smoke, I think teams aren't going to see anything new from him in the next couple of games that they've not seen in the last year. So we can just send them the video and send them a heavily edited video that makes him look like Maradona, and that'll do the trick. But it would certainly be interesting. One thing I would agree with Smoke is it would definitely throw Hearts off. I don't think they'll be expecting to see that. Tomo, you've gone with McCausland in your starting lineup. What are your thoughts on him? And do you think we're going to see him frequently? Obviously, we've got Cherney who's come in as a lone player, so there's a balance perhaps there to be struck between playing a player that isn't guaranteed to be here in the next couple of seasons compared to obviously McCausland, who has the potential to be here for years, depending. What's your thoughts on how that side of the sort of attack will pan out?
Yeah, I mean, when I was putting the team together, it was just more a case of how light we are down that right-hand side. I mean, you could potentially have Cortez and Matondo, the two out wide. I just couldn't sort of bring myself to put Scott Wright in my starting lineup at the start of the 24-25 season. So, sorry to be a bit harsh on the guy, but he's not what we need. But McCausland, I think he was thrown in because of necessity, I think, at the time, and he done all right. He done all right for his first sort of full season, shall we say. He needs to just kick on a little bit now. Towards the end of the season, he got a couple more goals, a couple more assists. Maybe hasn't done it as much in pre-season. So I think Cherney, as long as he's shown it in training, I think he'll be the first name on that right-hand side if that's how we're going to play. And it'll be up to McCausland to learn and take that position off him if he's doing the business, as I say, in training when he gets his minutes. And I think I'll put Tavernier in there because, as far as I'm concerned, as long as he's still at the club, he's the best right back we've got. So until we get someone better, then I don't see him being dropped. But I totally agree. I can't remember who said it, but this needs to be the season we start transitioning on from him. If he does stay here after the transfer window's finished, whoever it's going to be, whether it's Sterling, Devine, whoever, we can't have Tavernier playing 50-odd games a season. We need to be getting someone in there to share the load, because he's 32, 33 now. He's not 28 anymore. He can't do the same job that he once did. And again, points were made about our team, maybe him being a little bit more defensive, not getting forward as much, and then leaving the forward stuff to the midfielders and forwards. But it'll be interesting. But I think Tavernier starts, and the fact that they haven't announced it was a new captain of the club or anything like that suggests that he's still the captain. So as long as he's got that, he's going to be playing, isn't he? Is my take on that.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting talking point, actually, because I know I've disagreed with this on some people, I think in the chat, but a couple of my mates in real life about the idea that does the captain absolutely have to play all the time? And I think my point of view, that I'll quickly touch on it with you guys as well. My point of view is that normally, yes. However, when you're dealing with I don't want to use the phrase elder statesman per se, but like someone like Tav, who's been in the club for a long time and is obviously, if he is going to be here, the club is obviously looking to move forward. I think there is more scope to have it, because it's, he's the club captain. He can still operate in that position from the place of not necessarily starting. If he was like 25 and at the top of his game, then yes, you're expecting him to play all the time, and you wouldn't expect him if we brought in a better player. There'd maybe be a concern there. But I think if you're in a transition season, the captain is something that can be transitioning as well. He's obviously got a lot of new voices in there that I think is going to form a new leadership group. We've got Butland in there. Proper was captain at 20, of course. We're expecting leadership to come in from him. A lot of people are hoping to see leadership qualities from players like Barron. So you could see a transition of sort of the let's say the volume of those voices, maybe, because I think it's right. Tavernier, if he stays, to me, the issue last year, and to a slightly lesser extent the year before as well, with Tavernier, was too many games, because he was fine for 3/4 of the season, and then in the last quarter of the season he just absolutely went off the cliff. And I think a lot of people are only remembering that last quarter of the season, and they're kind of forgetting that he was basically just Tavernier mostly as normal the period before. And so I feel like we can still gain benefit from him by playing him just 30-40 games rather than 50-60, and then you can get the benefit. And then I think he comes to the end of the next season, he'll have been here a decade. We've ideally got someone who's coming in, playing games, looking good in that position, and so he can then either just choose to retire or move on. He'll get his testimonial, and hopefully he ends into the season with a couple more trophies. And then for the Tav fans among us, like myself, that's the kind of happy ending for everybody.
I was going to say, I don't know. I'm getting the feeling you left Tav out there 3 lineups deliberately so you could talk about him there for a while.
He's not my plan.
We all agree with you. We all agree that you still get potential. You can still offer something. I'm more interested. You've got a couple of people in the comments that are just arguing away back and forward about Capwell's stats. Actually, despite the fact that he's already been told he's not getting a future at the club, really, and he's not going to be there. So. It's interesting going back and forward to whether how many stats, how well he done last season. So they obviously maybe switched off at that little bit.
It's yes, as I say, there's a lot of chat there about Cantwell. That's actually been going for quite a bit, actually. Guys, do you think that is the captain, whoever it may be, or I suppose specifically with this situation, can Tavernier stay captain without playing every game?
I thought it segued out the Tav story, but we'll keep going for a wee sec. I think he is. I suppose, as you say, the first 3 quarters of the season, that his fellow professionals thought he was in top 5 players of the year. So that suggests that he was still his ability to offer plenty. I think if you get to a stage where he's playing 40 games as opposed to 60 games, that would be ideal. And the club captain versus the person that's captain, whether that be proper or whoever it may be, for the other 20 games would be, to me, the ideal outcome. If you can get 40 games, get the output we've had, which is effectively a 1 and 2 goal contribution, I think. And I might be wrong. Some of the comments will tell me if I'm wrong, since that's what's been going on over other players. But if that's the case, I think, if you get that and if somebody else covering them and supporting that load for the rest of the season, that's the ideal scenario.
Cool. Okie doke. So the next thing on the agenda then is how we look at our predicted scores for the tomorrow then. So I'll start with you, Tomo, and work my way up this time. What do you think we're going to see score-wise?
I think it's going to be a fairly comfortable 3-1 to us. I think Dessers will get a couple and a Tavernier penalty. Start the season off right.
Okay, look, and moving up to yourself, Gary.
I would have went 3-1 as well if Tom hadn't said that, and so I will go for 2-1. And if we're looking at goal scorers, I think that Scott Wright may just for Dave. No, that was only for Dave. No, I think Suter come back to Hearts might be a good shout. And and the funny thing is, you're obviously looking, if you look at a Rangers goal scorer, Tav's always one of the shouts just because he can do that. So we'll go Tav with a free kick.
Free kick, okay. And Dave, how about yourself? I think you're on mute there.
Hey, great start. Yeah, I'll probably go 2-1, mate. I would probably say Lawrence and Dessers.
Lawrence and Dessers, okay. Yeah, I'm kind of feeling 3-1 myself. I think Dessers will get a goal as he usually does. I'm going to see Diomande. I'd quite like to see him start off the season strong with a goal as well. I think all of us have said 1 to Hearts, so Shankland will probably score that one. Smoke has gone for the complete opposite way. He said 4-1 to Hearts, so terrible. He definitely didn't add that was a joke afterwards. He's just not very enthusiastic. No, I lie. He says he is saying 4-1 to the famous, so he's going very strong there. We've got Scott has suggested 2-1. And with Diomande and Cortez scoring, Paul has got 2-0 with Diomande and Dessers. So Diomande and Dessers appearing a couple of times. Just at the very end there, as I think this does fit into the kind of pre-season theme, Paul's touching on, will VAR trying to screw us over? How do you think VAR will play into the season, Dave?
I think the thing with VAR, right, is the vast majority of decisions it does get it right. But because you've got that kind of video evidence, it means inevitably when something is called wrong, it gets far greater visibility and greater discussion. To be honest, I think regardless of VAR, if we can bang in enough goals, VAR doesn't matter, right? And ultimately, that's got to be our aim. Make it all about what we can do, and then VAR, Willie Golem heading up the blooming refs now, none of that matters. And, I know people have got a view on that, but at the end of the day, if we look after ourselves, it shouldn't be a factor.
Okay, Gary, what do you think? You think similar to David, do you think VAR ultimately won't or shouldn't be a factor, or will we have any issue with it?
We will have excitement, we'll have drama, we'll have contentious decisions, we'll have things that people disagree with. We will hopefully not have what happened last year, whereby there was a lot of subjective decisions that I've no issue with offsides, I've no issues with things that are relatively clear cut. When there's subjective decisions that seem to go more regularly against you in the big moments at different points, and I think somebody, maybe Tom at the start, has talked about we need to win, or Dave talked about we need to win, or parity around the Celtic games. There was a lot of big decisions that could have influenced the game that still we could sit as the four of us we probably would obviously lead one way, but you can sit with 4 people and have different views on that one, those incidents. So I think that's what I would like to see, less contentious ones that are subjective and more factual. And hopefully we get a better rub of the green around them this year.
Okay, and Tom, what about yourself? Have you got any worries about VAR coming into the new year?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, people go on about VAR, but at the end of the day, it's still human beings that are looking at it and making the decisions. And as Gary rightly said, it's what that person viewing the video sees as a foul or whatever it may be. A lot of it seems to be subjective, and that's what I'd like to see sort of go out of a game. These almost being re-refereed. Let the referee make the decision on the pitch, and if he's made an absolute howler, pull him up on it and say maybe you need to have another look at this. Things that are potentially where there's been a clash of legs or whatever 15, 20 seconds beforehand, and then a goal being scored and then it gets pulled back. These sort of things, it's like if the referee's 5 yards away from the incident and he's not gave a free kick, he's not seen it as a foul. So, we'll let the game roll on. But as Gary rightly says, there'll be controversy. There always is. We need to fill up the 24-hour news channels and fill the back pages and have the likes of us talk about things on our podcasts. So, yes, I hope it doesn't interfere as much as it did last season with us. But we know that there will be decisions that we don't agree with.
Just to be clear as well, I'm all reason and light and calmness at the minute, but I guarantee you, as soon as the first decision goes against us, I'll be screaming about the ref and all that.
Throwing the TV across the room. Yeah, but I think exactly the same. We'll have plenty to talk about. I think it's just whether or not will it be addendums at the end of pods, or will we be doing entire dedicated VAR pods? That'll be the difference. Hopefully, as I say, we see improvements. Like Tom Lee said there, it's the humans at the end of the process that I think are often the Achilles heel. So hopefully, with a year's experience, they'll get a little bit better. But this is Scottish football, so I won't hold my breath too tightly on that one.
Doug, just to come in very briefly there, I think one of the things is we also don't know the rules, really, do we? We're punters, we don't really know, there's things that are quite strange when you see them.
Of course we know the rules, Gary.
You see some of them, there was ones...
read the IFAB website every night before you go to bed.
I missed that one, I was waiting for the video to come out. But no, I think there's the Euros themselves, and there's lots of things, incidents you're thinking, that looks like a penalty, that looks like a foul, that looks like something that should be looked at, and it wasn't. And some of the last season, we could always go back to the Dessers one in the Celtic game, or the Morelos one against Borussia Dortmund. To us, looking at the game, it's never a foul. It doesn't make any sense as a foul, but somewhere in the rules, somebody thinks there's a logic to that, and that's the problem around it. And I don't think that's going to be solved. That's not going to be solved this year. It's not going to be solved next year or the year after, and that's what makes it football beautiful, I guess.
The beautiful game, yeah. True. That could actually make an interesting pod. Sort of looking at the rule, getting a couple of examples, maybe, or indeed if they come up during the season, and comparing them to the actual rule book itself and seeing what we think of. I'm
almost positive they'll come up in the season, Doug.
I think that's forgiven. If that's something that you'd like to see, guys, give this video a like, and that's something we can do during the season. Or as I say, there's plenty of examples from last season we can use. Okay, so to finish us off, then, obviously this is our pre-season special. In addition to looking at Hearts, so I just want to throw out these kind of end of year awards, if you like, to the guys and get their responses, and also you guys in the comments. If you guys pop into the comments who you think will end up with these awards, and we'll have a wee flick through what you guys think also. So I've picked out 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 kind of main ones. So I'd like to hear from everyone who they think will be our player of the year this year, who you think our top scorer will be, where do you think will end up in Europe? Will it be Champions League group stages, or Europa League group stages, or worse? And what do you think, or who do you think, sorry, will be the biggest surprise? It could be a lot, I don't know. The biggest surprise could be that we end up in Ibrox this weekend. Who knows? But yeah, who do you think will be the biggest surprise? So those are the four. So guys, as I say, if you want to throw yours in the comments as well, I'll bring those up as we're going through the panelists. So I'll start with you, Tomo, and go opposite way around the group this time. So I'll start with, who do you think is going to be the player of the year?
I'm really excited for Diamande this season. I think he had a decent start with us last year in a little bit of difficult circumstances, so hopefully a bit more settled, playing more regularly. I really hope he kicks on. So for me, I think it'll be Diamande.
Diamande, great. And top scorer?
I'm going to go with Dessers. I think he gets the goals. I'm not a massive fan of his all-round play in terms of link-up, but he scores goals, and if he's given a run of games, I think he'll be the one to get the most goals this season.
Do you think he beats 20?
I think so. I think he'll, as long as he's still getting into those positions, and against Union Berlin, I like the goals that he scored. He took up really good positions, and he looked a little bit fitter than what he did last season. So hopefully, again, he can kick on.
Okay, look. How do you think we're going in Europe?
My heart says we'll get into the Champions League, but my head's saying we'll fall at the playoff round and we'll be in the Europa League this season.
Okay, look. And finally, who do you think will be the biggest surprise?
I think Cortez. He could, again, I thought he was really impressive in the few games that he played for us. So again, hopefully he has a season that isn't injury ravaged, and he will show us what we're forking the money out for, really.
Cool. Perfect. So move over to yourself, Gary. I'll go also reverse ways through the list here. So starting off, who do you think our biggest surprise will be this season?
So Scott Wright will finally fulfill his potential. Is that maybe one of them?
I swear you just try to wind me up at this point.
It needs to be something that's capable of happening in this reality, not alternative realities.
The fact that I can see Dave's face every time I say it, I can't help it.
When we come back in May, Wright's got the Scottish Player of the Year, Gary will be like, "See, told you all."
Exactly. I think the biggest surprise will be, I suppose I was a bit harsh on Barron, and I think he has got potential. The biggest surprise for me will be that our fears at the start of the season were unrealised, and we are coasting away with success. I'll go with that for the biggest surprise.
I like that surprise. We can all get behind that, I think. Okay, how do you think we'll do in Europe?
I was on a pod a few weeks ago and I was blindly optimistic. A few weeks later, after the pre-season games, I was very much the opposite way. And then after Union Berlin and a couple of signings, I'm now moving back again to optimism. So I think I would probably say playoff round, Europa League, make it through to the last 16, and that would be satisfactory for me. I think the Champions League's maybe too. My worry is if you go to Champions League, what do you achieve? You're pushing to reach 24th to get in the next round. I think the Europa League maybe gives a bit more
money in it.
Yeah.
Which is obviously important, but outside of that, there's no competitive advantage for us being in the Champions League.
Yeah, I'd agree. So that's my hope, to reach the last 16, last 8 of the Europa League.
Okay, and top scorer for you?
It's got to be Dessers. I think it has. I mean, arguably Danilo should become first choice as soon as he reaches a level of fitness at £6 million. But Dessers has proven that he will score goals, no matter what anybody else says about his ability. At the moment, as it stands, without any new signings, he's proven he'll score goals. He's proven throughout most of his career he'll score 20 plus. And the only real competitor will be Tav, sadly, as it probably has been every other year.
But interestingly enough, on that like transitional point, I wonder if he'll continue to take all the penalties if he doesn't play frequently. That could be quite an interesting one for the top scorer if Dessers or Danilo or someone else.
If we had a penalty tomorrow, who would you want to stand up to take it?
Tavernier, but
Yep.
but my point more is that if he's not on the park as often,
Yes,
there will be chances. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see who gets them. But then, as I say, the impact that could have. So, because that does give to have a significant advantage when it comes to top scorer, we have to admit. Okay, and finally, your player of the year.
I mean, at the moment, Diamandi is the best quality player we've got. Now, if he maintains that form or develops further as they should, he will be undoubtedly the player that we look to as player of the year. I think beyond that, there's a lot of good players, but I don't think there's an outstanding player. And I suppose that's when I look at the team. There's ones I think are good players. I think they're tidy in what they do. There's a reason they're at Rangers because they're not outstanding players. There's people in the chat criticising Matondo or whoever it may be because that's probably at Rangers in some ways. But Diamandi's the one that probably we see going beyond Rangers pretty soon, and that's why I'd go with him as well.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a good choice. Okay, so moving over to Dave. Then I'll start in the middle with you. How do you think we'll get on in Europe? Seeing as you came in on that point.
Yeah, I think the guys have nailed it, mate. I think we should have enough in theory to get past Kiev. I think playoffs might be a step too far at that stage of the season, given we're still trying to gel together properly. So I think we drop to the Europa, and kind of with Gary, I think, as long as you get out of the kind of league phase now, used to be group phase, and you get into that knockout stage, I think that could be classed as successful. Yeah, as I said, obviously financially that's a bit of a hit, but competitiveness, the ability for us to go and compete, I think is there in the Europa, especially as that team develops as we go along. I just think the Champions League's probably a stage too far at the minute, and outside of the money, what does getting battered 7-1 or 4-0 or whatever, what good does that do a team that's trying to gel, trying to grow confidence? Yeah, that's where I think we'll be at. And I think as long as we get out of the league phase of the Europa, we could class that as a successful season.
Yeah, that would add a good collection of yours doing similar. Okay, I'll come to top scorer with you next.
Pains me to say Dessers. I'm kind of torn, if I'm being honest. I just don't know with Danilo yet. And I suppose the other curveball is Dessers could still potentially go and be replaced. So I think the way things are right now, I'd have to say Dessers. Kind of sticks in my throat as I'm saying it. But yeah, I think, barring a major change, barring Danilo really breaking out, it probably would be him.
Okay, look. And biggest surprise of the season for you?
So this one's maybe a bit left field. I'm not even sure at this point if I'm just saying it to say something different from these two, or if I genuinely believe it. But I could see Nsiala, if we don't bring another centre back, potentially coming into the team through the year. I think he's very, very raw, but he's got a lot of bloody good attributes. And he can pick a pass out of defence. I was noticing that in the game that we saw the Man U game. I think now. He actually got dragged out by the wife for the Union one, so I didn't see that. But the game that he played, I remember watching him. That's right. It was the Birmingham, yeah. And I just remember him picking some really nice passes out there. I mean, he was pretty awful the first few minutes, but he kind of grew into it, got a bit more confident. He's got a bit of a pass on him. He's got pace. So I think the potential's there. Again, I think a lot of it comes down to what we do in the transfer window. If we bring in another centre back, he maybe doesn't get that chance. I think if we don't, then he might get some minutes, and if he can grab it, he could go on and surprise us a bit this season.
Yeah, that's a great shout. It's a player we've not really touched on much NCR, so it will be interesting to see how he gets on, how many minutes he gets. Okay, and the big one then, who do you think will be your player of the season?
Hi, dear. Simple as that. I did see a comment actually mention Cortez, and potentially that's a shout. But I just think one, as Gary alluded to, Dio's a bit more established. He didn't have that bright injury that Cortez had, and I think the other point that I would note there is, in some respects, it's maybe easier for a midfielder to do it than a winger. And what I mean by that is generally wingers will kind of come in and out of the game. They're not going to be controlling that game for 90 minutes, whereas a midfielder obviously has got that opportunity to do it. So I think between the 2 points, it'll be Dio, if I'm being honest, but Cortez might run in close.
Yep, I think I agree with a lot of what the guys have said there. Has to throw my own in just at the end. Player of the year, I think I'm going to say either Diamandi or Barron, one of the two. As I say, I'm quite excited to see the two of them together. If I'm forced to pick one, I would say Dio as well, because I think he'll get more goals, and that always brings the plaudits. But I think
I was going to say, if you're forced to pick one, I'll pick Tab. I thought you were going to say
that. Well, I'm on my top scorer now, so
now you mention it.
And I'm going to go left field. I'm going to say our top scorer has yet to be signed. I'm going to say in connection to number 3 that we get into the Champions League and then go and splash on an exciting striker, and he will be our top scorer. Although if I put my serious head back on, it's such a tough, like we're saying there, Champions League gets the money, and we kind of need the money to keep ourselves in touch. But at the same time, personally, I am, I'll take another Euro run, even if it's not all the way to a final. That gives us nights like we had on our run to Seville, over getting humped 7-1. No matter how much money it's earning us. So my preference would probably be right now to do that. But at the same time, I would love to see us go to the Champions League and be competitive. It's just whether we can do that this year. I think we can and will do that in the future, but whether it's this year is another thing. Biggest surprise, I'll say Manny for that, just because it'll be a surprise that he exists, and he's a real player. So I've seen photographs, and he looks like a smiley chap. So I'm looking forward to seeing him, but. He's a bit of a ghost at the moment, so I'll say he's a surprise because we'll finally find out he exists, and he'll get a couple of goals. So that's what I'll say for us. Okay, so we've had time for our sort of special this evening. Thank you to everyone for tuning in this evening. This was a bit of a longer one for talking about both the game and the year coming. Obviously, we all hope for the best we can get. It's been a bit of a tough window with everything that's gone on. But it's starting to get a little bit more exciting. We've got a few players in, hopefully a few more to come. I don't think we massively touched on obviously Clement getting a new contract as well, which I think is a big sign from the board and the club to say, this is a dedicated long haul process. We're not going to repeat what we've been doing, which is what Bennett said in his interview as well. So it's nice to sort of immediately see some evidence of those words meaning something. In my opinion, and I think that, to me, that's kind of what that signifies, that we are going to give him a bit of time. So as long as nothing disastrous happens, then that will hopefully be what we see with the team and manager developing together with this younger team that we have now. Just go through the group and thank everyone for their participation points, their lineups, and for putting up with me monologuing about nobody in particular. Dave, thank you very much for coming along today.
No, cheers for having me. Other than the odd Scott Wright fanboy, it was a pleasure.
So I guess I'm not on my own fanboy, that's true. And Gary, thank you very much.
No, thank you. It was interesting, as it's exciting times, and as you say, there's so many things we haven't even touched on yet. That's why the pods are on so regularly.
And Tomo, thank you yourself as always. I managed to hear you after that, a little bump at the beginning there. It's been all good since for the rest of the pod, so all went well. So thank you for your participation as well.
No, as I say, always a pleasure, Doug. Great job hosting, and it's been a good conversation with everyone here and in the comments. And I'm looking forward to the next 10 months where my mood's going to be dependent on a football team's result every week. So was my girlfriend. So she's been warned.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone in the chat who's participated and making the Rangers Journal community an exciting place to be. As John has said, he didn't even hear a word I said about Tavernier because he's been too busy chatting in the group, and that's grand. Perfectly happy for you to be chatting amongst yourselves. That's what we want to build a community of Rangers fans. So. As I say, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you for listening to our points. Hopefully we get on well tomorrow and start the season off with a positive win to inject a bit of positivity, because that's, I think, what we've been desperately needing over the last couple of months. It's been a bit of a downer. So let's get this going, Rangers, with a win first and foremost, but ideally a bit of nice football. And then we will be back with you all week with more episodes of the Rangers Journal, because every night is Rangers Journal.